There are rumors around that this is Britain's revenge for the Boston Tea Party. 3,000 screaming teenagers are at New York's Kennedy Airport to greet, you guessed it, the Beatles.
Before the Beatles became a worldwide pop phenomenon, they were only one part of a revolution brewing in the port town of Liverpool, England. Young musicians there absorbed the sounds coming from America and were about to embark on an invasion that would change the world of music. The headquarters for this operation was a small, dark, subterranean club called The Cavern.
The Cavern was an old fruit warehouse right in the centre of Liverpool.
When channeled through these 3 narrow brick tunnels which constituted the cavern at the time, the sound was phenomenal.
One way in, a narrow staircase, only one way out. A disaster waiting to happen.
The atmosphere, the sheer heat, the sheer smell, actually, all contributed to this legendary cavern ambience.
Lots of frenzy, lots of screaming girls, lots of high-energy rock and roll, lots of sweat.
Water used to just run down the walls, which was just, condensation after people sweating,
Unbelievable, funky, great times at the Cavern. It was very, very special.
The crowds that suffered through the conditions at the Cavern were rewarded with witnessing the birth of a temple of rock. If you travel to Matthew Street in Liverpool today, you'll be rewarded with a modern-day cavern club, offering music day and night. By visiting Liverpool, you'll realize how its welcoming ways helped nurture the sound that shook the world. Set on the banks of the Mersey River, it was the first stop for new music and culture traveling across the Atlantic in the late 50s.
Musically, when Elvis came out, and coming from Liverpool, all the rock records that all the guys in the Navy were bringing in.
Life goes on day after day.
Any seaport has more music than anywhere else, so we started playing music from all over the world.
So ferry, cross the Mersey, cross this land.
But before these new sounds arrived in England, the Cavern had firmly established itself as a jazz cellar. Open since 1957, the Cavern had little use for an upstart new beat.
Used to have fights in Liverpool with bands because some of the drummers were trying to play jazz, and I said, no, rock and roll.
It wasn't licensed at all, the Cavern. You could only buy Coca-Cola or tea and coffee, and So the jazzers used to go to the pub. We used to play in between the jazz bands going for a drink.
Once rock and roll was played on the stage of the Cavern, there was no looking back. The Cavern's lack of a liquor license made it perfect for a teenage hangout. It soon became a mecca for young Liverpudlians looking to dig a new rockin' sound. And the young bands playing there weren't content with just imitating American records.
And bands like ourselves, and especially the Beatles, were probably the first bands to come out where they had 3 lead singers. They did vocal harmony songs, as well as playing all the musicians themselves, so they were completely self-contained, which made them different to everything else that was happening in the world, really.
All of a sudden, rock and roll became very real, very simple, very energetic, very primitive in a way.
One of the most popular bands to play the Cavern was, of course, the Beatles. But they weren't exactly the same band that would shake up the world of music only a few years later.
By the time the Beatles became regulars at the Cavern, they did comprise of John and Paul McCartney and George Harrison of the subsequently legendary lineup. But the Beatles had long had problems attracting a drummer. It was because they were called upon to fulfil some bookings in Hamburg that they needed a drummer at short notice, and that was how they acquired Pete Best, another local boy.
There was Pete, who was this good-looking guy, and Bob Buller, the DJ, would say, "Can I hear it one more time for John, George, Paul?" And when Pete used to walk on the stage, the kids just mobbed the stage, man.
He was the most popular in the band. People in those days, before the Beatles made it outside of Liverpool, used to camp out and sleep in his garden.
First time I saw the Beatles, the thing that hit me besides the great vocals and the great musicianship was Pete Best's bass drum. It just thundered in the cavern.
The Beatles' sound attracted many newcomers to the cavern, including the man who would change their lives forever, manager Brian Epstein.
Now, Brian Epstein was working literally a couple of hundred yards away from the place where the Beatles were playing every day, and Brian was in charge of the one of the larger record stores in the city.
Brian Epstein went down them steps into the cavern, which wasn't the most pleasant place in the world, and saw the Beatles on the stage, and brought the Beatles from there to the top of their game.
Brian Epstein is credited with discovering the Beatles at the cavern, but it remains a mystery as to who and what made them change their lineup just before they made it big.
We went to Brian's office one day, Brian Epstein's office. He asked to see us. So we got the lift up there, and as we opened the lift, Pete Best was walking out of Brian's office. And we said, "All right, Pete, how you doing?" And he just looked at us blankly, got on the lift and went down. And then Brian's secretary came out and said, "Tony, Billy, I'm sorry, Brian can't see you at the moment. He will explain later." Right? And we didn't find out for another couple of days that Pete had just been sacked, literally minutes before we went up.
And when news of Pete's sacking reached the fans at the cavern, there was an uproar of protest.
The crowd were pissed off because they're like, Peter was a good-looking lad.
And such was the degree of hostility that entering the cavern that night, George Harrison was attacked.
We were there, actually,
at the cavern when Ringo's first show.
But George didn't play because he had a black eye.
Somehow they picked on George, said it must be your fault, so somebody punched him.
George got the punch, yeah.
And in some of the Beatles' very earliest publicity shots taken at the time that they began their recording career, you can actually still see the remnants of a black eye on George Harrison's features.
I don't think it came up to the drumming ability. I think it was the look.
It took a long time for them to accept Ringo. In fact, they never really accepted Ringo, not people in Liverpool. It was only when it went worldwide that, okay, he then became a Beatle.
The Beatles left Liverpool and the cavern in 1963. They were whisked off on a flight to stardom that they never could have imagined. But for all their worldly success, it just may be that their best performances were left behind at the cavern.
I believe the best I ever heard the Beatles, and I did a lot of shows with them, was at the cavern. There was nobody screaming and nobody going crazy, and you could really appreciate what they were all about.
The cavern continued on without the Beatles, featuring many of the best bands Britain had to offer. But in 1973, plans for a new underground railway ran right through the cavern, and the buildings on top of it were demolished, closing the original site forever. Spurred by John Lennon's death in 1980, Liverpool regained interest in their favorite sons and opened the new Cavern Club in 1984. Built adjacent to the original, it used original cavern bricks for its arches and its stairwells.
And the group is called...
Linda?
Yes, Mr. Epstein?
Do you know a local group called the Beat Brothers?
Must mean the Beatles.
The Beatles? What kind of a name is that?
They're the hottest group around. You should really go and see them, Mr. Epstein. They play every lunch out at the cabin.
Where's that?
Seems so
Let's see some vinyl.
Yeah.
Let's see some vinyl. Let me tell you about this one. This is the one when I realized that these are now acid heads.
Right.
I happen to be myself on a psychedelic substance.
Yeah.
Hey, groovy. We went over to someone's house, and I'm just going, whoa. And I said, oh, new Beatles album, man, let me see it. And they showed me this, and I went, boing, because you could look into their eyes, and you knew these fellows had all ingested LSD. That rubber-soled album cover, and they're all looking down. You looked at them and went, uh-oh, these guys have been psychedelicized.